Imagine this. You're in a dark, silent room, the type of silence that presses on your ears, making each heartbeat sound deafening. Outside, the night is colder than usual, a chill that seeps through the walls, turning your breath visible even in the dark. You're curled up under layers of blankets, but no matter how tightly you wrap yourself, there's an unnatural cold creeping in, making your bones feel like ice. Then, as if the shadows themselves are reaching out, you feel something subtle, something light, moving at the foot of your bed. It's like the faintest pressure, barely there, a soft, insistent shifting on the mattress. You think it must be a trick of the mind, but it gets worse. Something barely brushes against the side of your head, lingering near your pillow, sending a shiver down your spine that you can't shake off. You're frozen, too terrified to turn and look, knowing in your gut that whatever is there is watching. As the tension builds, explain to the audience that this isn't just a scary story. This is a first-person account, a memory that refuses to fade, something that haunts the person's every night since. With each word, hint that this story isn't merely about feeling fear, but about the experience of facing something beyond our understanding, a thing that exists somewhere in the shadows, just out of sight, but always there. Warn the viewers that what they're about to hear isn't for faint-hearted, that once they hear this story, they might just start questioning the shadows in their own rooms. This is an invitation for viewers to stay, to be drawn in, whether out of sheer curiosity or because they crave the chill of a true, terrifying encounter. Encourage them to like, share, and subscribe to Sinister Stories, because if they're watching, they clearly have a taste for fear. Tell them to keep the lights on, because after this story, even the faintest flicker of a shadow could feel like something more. The story unfolds in a house with a history. It's the kind of place where every step echoes just a little too long, and every door creaks no matter how slowly you push it open. The house stands isolated, surrounded by a forest that, even in the daylight, appears unnaturally dense, with twisted branches that knot together like fingers in some silent pact. At night, the shadows cling to each wall, stretching like hungry arms reaching from the corners, as though something unseen is waiting just beyond the dim glow of the single hallway lamp. The room where our protagonist is staying holds an eerie chill, a strange, lingering dampness in the air, as if the walls themselves have absorbed the horrors whispered within them. The room is sparsely decorated, with faded wallpaper that seems to peel away, exposing patches of darkness beneath, like bruises on the house itself. There's a lone window, grimy with age, casting a pale, sickly light from the faint moon outside, barely illuminating the space, but enough to cast unsettling shadows that shift and sway with each breeze. A collection of antique dolls sits on a shelf against one wall, their glassy eyes catching the light and giving the eerie impression that they're watching, unblinking, each movement in the room. They sit in silence, a silence so heavy it feels as though they're listening, absorbing the faintest sounds, waiting for something. This unsettling quiet is occasionally broken by faint, almost imperceptible sounds. The soft creak of wood, the faint rattle of something brushing against the walls, as if the house itself is alive, breathing. The forest outside seems to pulse with its own life, its own secrets, whispering in a language that's not meant for human ears. And then, from time to time, the darkness outside seems to press against the window, like it's trying to seep into the room, claiming it. It's a darkness so profound, so heavy, that even the strongest light would struggle to pierce it. Our protagonist's sense of unease grows as they settle in for the night, the hairs on the back of their neck prickling as they try to ignore the feeling that something in this house has noticed them, that something has been waiting. This is a place where the past never died. Instead, it lingers festering, clinging to each wall, each floorboard, waiting for anyone brave or foolish enough to step inside. And as the night deepens, the house and its unseen occupants seem to awaken, drawn to the warmth of life in their midst, ready to reach out from the shadows, just waiting for the right moment. This haunting setup into the unsettling atmosphere, making them feel as if they're standing there, holding their breath, listening to the creaks, and watching the shadows shift, unable to shake the feeling that something is very, very wrong. It starts subtly, like the kind of sensations that could almost be explained away if it weren't for the lingering feeling that something is profoundly wrong. At first, it's the temperature, a sudden, unnatural drop that cuts through the room, turning each breath into a visible puff of mist. The blankets feel useless against this chill, which seems to rise not from outside, but from somewhere deep within the house, seeping through the floorboards and walls like an icy breath. The protagonist lies there, trying to shake off the feeling, attributing it to a draft or perhaps an overactive imagination, even as every fiber of their being screams that they are not alone. But then, the noises begin. At first, they're faint, almost easy to dismiss as the house settling. A soft, repetitive tapping, like something tiny and restless moving in the shadows. The sound seems to come from the foot of the bed, a place where they dare not look, where they can't bring themselves to move their gaze, afraid of what they might see. The tapping grows louder, steady, like the sound of small feet scurrying across the mattress, pacing with a kind of eerie purpose. The room is still, but this movement feels almost alive, almost sentient, as if something unseen is walking with delicate steps, daring to approach. Suddenly, they feel it, a faint, gentle weight pressing down near their feet, just the slightest pressure that freezes their blood. Whatever it is, it's moving, shifting in almost rhythmic steps along the mattress. It travels closer, then backs away, like it's testing their reaction, gauging their fear. They don't dare move, each muscle tensed as the small, almost imperceptible steps continue. And then, without warning, they feel another presence, a whisper of weight beside their head, a cold, solid touch pressing softly against the edge of the pillow. A chill races down their spine as the sensation lingers, like something curious is leaning close, watching. Unable to hold back their terror, they squeeze their eyes shut, hoping it's a nightmare they'll wake from any second. But when they open their eyes, the darkness feels thicker, more oppressive, as if the room itself is closing in. The air grows still, yet heavy, and the silence is deafening. In that silence, they swear they hear it, a faint, whispered sound, too low to make out, as though something is breathing words they're not meant to understand, words from a place far colder and darker than they could ever imagine. They don't know what's more terrifying, the possibility that they're imagining it, or the thought that something unseen, something malevolent, is sharing the room with them, inching closer with every silent breath. Further into the growing dread, as each subtle, inexplicable sign builds upon the last, leaving them trapped in the same fear that grips the protagonist, wondering what horrors lie in the darkness. The protagonist lies paralyzed in bed, each nerve alight with fear, as they debate what to do. Every instinct tells them to run, to escape from whatever dark presence lurks in the room. But fear holds them captive, a fear so deep that even moving feels impossible, as though every shadow has eyes on them, watching, waiting. They think of calling out, hoping that their friend asleep in the room will hear, but the words are trapped in their throat, strangled by dread. As the unseen presence continues its sinister pacing by their feet, they wrestle with a choice that feels almost life or death. Do they confront this terror, or try to pretend it's not there? The room seems to throb with tension, each second stretching out, an eternity of silence punctuated only by their shallow, trembling breaths. In that moment, curiosity fights with terror. A dark allure whispers that they should look, that they should face whatever is moving near their bed. But just as that thought takes hold, a faint, chilling memory flashes in their mind. The stories they heard, warnings about this room, tales of things that can't be unseen, things that latch onto you once they know you're aware of them. Every fiber of their being is conflicted, teetering between the urge to see and the instinct to flee. The silence grows heavier, charged with something almost electric, a presence that seems to weigh down the air itself. The friend shifts in bed nearby, a sound that breaks the suffocating quiet, and finally, the protagonist forces out a whisper, calling their friend's name. It's barely audible, more breath than voice, But the friend stirs, their groggy confusion a small comfort in the overwhelming fear. But just as they start to explain, their eyes lock onto the foot of the bed, where two small, pale figures sit. Dolls, twisted in eerie poses, their glassy eyes reflecting the dim light in a way that feels disturbingly alive. The friend, equally stunned, finally turns on the light, hoping to dispel whatever nightmare is unfolding. Yet the light reveals something even more terrifying. One doll sits at the protagonist's feet, its tiny painted hands resting on the edge of the blanket, as though it had just been walking there. The other is positioned by their pillow, its head cocked slightly, almost inquisitively, as if it had been studying them. An unspoken horror hangs in the air, a silent acknowledgement that these dolls were not there before, that they appeared in these positions while the two of them slept, as though drawn to the warmth of their bodies. This is the breaking point, the moment when survival instinct clashes with the need to understand. The friend, visibly shaken, mutters that it has to be a prank, maybe the work of someone trying to scare them. But deep down, they both know that no one else has entered the room, that there's no logical explanation for the doll's eerie arrival. The protagonist's heart races as they realize that they're faced with a choice. Do they stay and confront whatever dark force has invaded their sanctuary, or do they flee, leaving the mystery unsolved, but possibly never escaping its shadow? The decision feels like a pull between two evils, as if any choice they make will draw them deeper into the darkness. In a surge of desperation, the protagonist's friend lunges at the dolls, hurling them across the room with a mixture of anger and fear. They collide against the wall with a sharp crack, the porcelain faces shattering upon impact, leaving fragments scattered across the floor. The room falls into an eerie silence, as if the house itself is holding its breath, waiting. Relief washes over them for a brief moment, the illusion of safety creeping in. But just as they begin to steady their breathing, an ominous feeling seeps into the air, darker and heavier, as though breaking the dolls has unleashed something far worse, something invisible, yet undeniably present. Without warning, the overhead light flickers violently, plunging them into a dim, shadow-filled room that seems to stretch and warp in the half-light. A soft, chilling whisper drifts from the corner, too faint to make out, but unmistakably there. The friend, their voice barely above a whisper, mutters that it must be a trick of the mind, something their fear has conjured. But deep down, they both feel it, an unseen presence that is neither human nor kind, watching them from somewhere within the shadows, lurking with silent intent. Then, an almost imperceptible sound breaks the silence, the faintest scrape of porcelain against wood. Their eyes dart to the far side of the room, where one of the doll heads, fractured and lifeless just moments ago, now sits upright, its hollow, painted eyes seeming to bore into them with a strange, unnatural awareness. The protagonist's pulse pounds in their ears as they watch, horrified as the other doll, or what remains of it, shifts slightly, its broken limbs dragging across the floor, inching toward them in slow, jerky movements. It's as if something invisible is animating the shattered pieces, using the fragments of the dolls to convey its silent rage. Panic erupts within them, a primal terror that commands them to run, but their legs feel as if they're made of lead, paralyzed under the weight of fear. The friend, equally frozen, grips their hand tightly, eyes wide with terror as they whisper, "This isn't real. It can't be real." But no amount of reassurance can erase the sight of the fractured dolls crawling toward them, inch by inch, drawn to their presence like moths to a flame. Every tiny movement, every scrape, sends chills down their spines, each sound amplified in the silent, oppressive atmosphere. As the tension reaches its breaking point, the door to the room creaks open, and the friend's mother stands in the doorway, her face pale and strained. She's seen enough to understand that this is no ordinary nightmare. With a trembling voice, she tells them to follow her, to leave the room and not look back. Her own fear is evident, her eyes darting to the shifting shadows, acknowledging the unspoken horror that looms over them. As they step out, each of them feeling the weight of unseen eyes trailing them, the dolls go still, lifeless once more, but leaving behind an air of something unfinished, something waiting. This chilling confrontation becomes a memory they can't shake, an encounter that goes beyond the rational, leaving them with the haunting realization that some things, once awakened, never truly go back to sleep. This intense, suspense-filled scene in the terror of the moment, making them feel as though they, too, are in the room, facing the unknown and struggling to escape its relentless grasp. As they step out of the room, the house seems to breathe around them, a low hum vibrating through the walls as if it's coming alive, aware of their every movement. They feel a profound weight, a dense presence pressing in on them, trailing their steps down the hall. The friend's mother, visibly shaken and moving with cautious urgency, glances back only once, her face pale, lips pursed in a silent prayer, as though she knows that acknowledging whatever lurks behind them would only make it stronger. Just as they approach the front door, a soft, rhythmic tapping echoes down the corridor. The sound is unmistakable, porcelain tapping against wood, a deliberate, measured pace. They exchange terrified glances, knowing they left the shattered dolls back in bedroom, yet the sound grows louder, sharper, and more insistent, as if something is following, closing in. The mother tightens her grip on their hands, whispering to keep moving, her own voice barely steady. But they can't resist the pull, the dark compulsion to turn around, to see what's drawing nearer. Slowly, they look back down the dim hallway, and there, standing at the threshold of the room, is one of the dolls, whole once again, its fractured face now perfectly intact, yet twisted in an expression that seems almost alive, its painted eyes narrowed, watching them. Another doll sits beside it, head cocked, as if it's listening, an unsettling mockery of human curiosity. The dolls' faces, previously cold and expressionless, now bear subtle changes, darkened eyes that hold a glint of something almost malevolent, an awareness that defies explanation. The mother gasps, the sound sharp in the silence, and suddenly, the entire house seems to shift. The walls creak, the lights flicker, and a thick, icy fog begins to gather around the floor, swirling slowly, creeping toward them like fingers stretching from the shadows. The protagonist's heart races as they realize the truth. These dolls aren't just lifeless toys. They're conduits, vessels for something ancient and sinister, a dark force bound to the house, waiting for someone foolish enough to disturb its resting place. Their breaths come in shallow gasps as they understand, finally, what has been haunting them all along. It's not just the dolls. It's the very house itself, a prison for something unspeakable, something that has been trapped and hidden, only able to reach the outside world through those who dare to linger within its walls. Each fragment of porcelain, each haunting gaze, is a piece of the entity, a splinter of its consciousness that watches, waits, and manipulates the dolls to serve as its eyes and ears. Realization crashes over them, a horrifying clarity that they have somehow disturbed this entity, awoken it, and now it's marked them, watching with an insidious patience that promises it will follow. As they take a step back, eyes locked on the dolls' unblinking faces, a deep, raspy whisper echoes through the house, seeming to come from every wall and shadow. It's a single word, barely audible, but sends chills down their spines. Stay. Panic seizes them, and they make a mad dash toward the door, ignoring the pull of the house, the lingering feeling that if they look back just once more, they'll never leave. They burst into the night air, their hearts pounding, the oppressive presence loosening its grip as they stumble onto the cold, empty street. The house looms behind them, silent, dark, yet somehow still watching, its windows like eyes, waiting for the next victim. And in that final moment, as they catch their breath, they understand with chilling certainty that this encounter isn't over. The entity has marked them, and wherever they go, it will be waiting, patient, just out of sight in the shadows. This climax delivers an unsettling revelation, making feel the horror and suspense as the protagonist realizes they've become the target of something that may never truly leave them alone. The relentless, unseen force continues to haunt even as they escape, leaving the viewers with a lingering sense of dread and mystery. As they stumble down the empty street, adrenaline fading, the weight of what they've just escaped begins to settle in. They're out of the house, yet the cold from its presence still clings to them, like an invisible stain that no amount of distance can wash away. Every shadow along the road feels menacing. Each darkened window in the houses they pass seems to watch them, holding secrets just out of reach. They feel marked, as though the entity they disturbed has left a piece of itself embedded deep within them, and no amount of light or reassurance can shake the feeling that it's still there, lurking just out of sight, waiting. In the days that follow, they try to put the experience behind them, chalking it up to a nightmare, a trick of the mind brought on by fear and imagination. But the memory clings, haunting them in ways they can't fully explain. Shadows in their own home feel darker, colder, stretching just a little too far. Sometimes, in the dead of night, they hear faint tapping sounds echoing through the walls, a soft, rhythmic click that sends shivers down their spine, reminiscent of the doll's footsteps. They try to ignore it, but each sound feels more persistent, like a reminder that the terror isn't over, that it's merely biding its time. Sleep becomes difficult, haunted by dreams that replay the events of that night with a horrific clarity. In these dreams, they're back in the house, standing in front of the dolls with their unblinking eyes and twisted smiles. But now, they're alone, trapped, unable to leave. They wake drenched in sweat, the feeling of cold hands brushing against their skin lingering long after they open their eyes. It's as though the house has found a way to reach them, crossing the boundary between reality and nightmare, dragging pieces of its darkness into their life, twisting their waking moments with memories they cannot escape. The worst part is the doll. Days after the incident, they find one sitting on their shelf, identical to those in the house, with the same glassy eyes and painted grin. They didn't bring it back with them, they're certain of it. Yet there it is, staring at them with a silent promise of something darker. They try to throw it away, but the next morning, it's back, sitting in the same spot, as if nothing happened. Each time they discard it, it reappears, a silent reminder that they may never truly leave the entity's grasp. Friends and family begin to notice their unease, their haunted looks, but no one believes the full story, chalking it up to stress or vivid nightmares. Alone with their fear, they realize that their life has changed irrevocably. They start to avoid mirrors at night, fearing they'll see something that shouldn't be there. They can't shake the feeling of being watched, a sensation so strong that even a gentle breeze feels like fingers grazing their skin, and every creak in the floorboards echoes like a memory, a whisper of that dark, silent house. And so, their life becomes a shadow of what it once was. Each day they live in the waking world, trying to escape, while each night drags them back to that house, those dolls, and the presence that has attached itself to them. They may have left the house behind, but something ancient, malevolent, and unseen has followed, clinging to them like a shadow, patient, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself once more. The story ends with a lingering question. Will they ever truly escape, or have they become part of something eternal, bound to live their life as a vessel for the darkness that watches from the shadows? With one final, haunting glance at the audience, the narrator ends the story with a warning. Sometimes, even if you escape, it doesn't mean you're free. A chilling reminder that some encounters with the unknown can never be left behind, that once touched by darkness, it stays with you, a silent observer, waiting, always waiting. In the days that follow, the protagonist struggles to regain any semblance of normalcy, but life no longer feels quite real. There's a disconnect, a subtle shift in their perception, as if they're moving through a world that's only pretending to be familiar. Shadows feel deeper, darker. Their home, once a refuge, now feels like an unfamiliar landscape where unseen eyes seem to watch from every corner. Friends and family notice the change, their distant stare, their jumpiness, the haunted look that lingers no matter how much they try to hide it. They tell themselves that it's just paranoia, that there's no reason to feel like something is constantly watching, but the feeling persists, heavy and undeniable. One night, as they lie in bed, they're jolted awake by a familiar, unmistakable chill. The air grows dense, and they feel the weight of something pressing down on them, as if the darkness itself is wrapping around, clinging to every breath. The soft tapping sound returns, echoing through the room, a faint yet insistent reminder of that night in the house. Their heart races, the memories flooding back with such intensity that they're certain they never truly left that house, that perhaps a part of them was left behind, tethered to its endless shadows. But they dare not move, lying frozen in place, unwilling to confirm if something is standing in the corner, watching. They begin to notice strange patterns in their daily life. Lights flickering at odd intervals, objects moving from their original place, and cold spots lingering in rooms where the air is otherwise still. A faint whispering haunts the edge of their hearing, never clear enough to understand, but persistent, as though it's attempting to communicate, to lure them back into the darkness. Every reflection, be it in mirrors or windows, feels off, as if a shadowy figure lingers just behind them, vanishing the instant they turn. This relentless presence hangs over them, a silent reminder that they were marked, chosen by something ancient and unknowable, and it's not willing to let go. Their sleep is haunted by vivid dreams, unsettling in their familiarity. In these dreams, they're back in house, standing before the dolls with their unblinking, glassy eyes that seem to see right through them. The dolls' expressions have shifted. They're no longer mere toys, but silent judges, observing with a knowing gaze. The protagonist feels a pull, as though the house itself is calling, beckoning them back to where the nightmare began. They wake each morning drenched in cold sweat, but the feeling of having returned from that place is so strong that they question if they ever truly left. As they move through the monotony of daily life, the weight of the experience has transformed them. They're haunted not only by fear, but by a creeping awareness that the line between reality and nightmare has been blurred forever. Each creak in the floorboards, each distant echo, feels like a message, a calling that they can't ignore. They avoid walking alone at night, skip rooms where mirrors hang, and keep every light on. Yet the darkness seems to follow, slipping into the spaces between seconds, like a whisper in a forgotten language, a soundless promise that one day it will return. The final reflection leaves the audience with a haunting truth. Some encounters leave a scar that cannot be erased, an unseen mark that lingers like a shadow, binding you to the unknown. As the protagonist looks into the camera, their gaze empty and worn, they share one last warning, their voice trembling with the weight of unspeakable knowledge. If you ever find yourself standing in a place where the shadows feel too real, too alive, walk away. Don't let it know you've seen it, because once you do, it will follow, and it will never let you go